Experience the kinetic energy of a soul in motion, constantly evolving and pushing against the boundaries of reality. Our 3D cinematic visuals capture the heat and the passion of a life lived at full speed. Subscribe today and feel the incredible power of a story that never stops.
The room went completely silent. 200 people holding champagne glasses, tuxedos pressed, flowers arranged perfectly on every table, and every single one of them was staring at me. My son had just finished his toast. I set my glass down slowly, the way I used to set down a pen after signing a verdict. I looked at my son standing at the head table, microphone still in his hand, smile still on his face. His new wife's parents, the Hargrove family, were laughing and nodding from the table across from mine. And I thought to myself, you have no idea what you just started, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really began. My name is not important. What matters is that I spent 32 years opening chests, repairing hearts, giving people back their lives. I retired at 64 with a reputation that took 3 decades to build. A house I paid for with my own hands, and one son, my son, Daniel, who I believed was the greatest thing I had ever done. His mother passed when Daniel was 11. Pancreatic cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the end. I worked through most of it because I didn't know how else to cope, and I have carried that guilt every day since. But I was there. I coached his little league team for 4 seasons with a pager on my hip. I drove him to every college visit. I paid for his law degree at Georgetown, which cost more than my first house. When he passed the bar, I cried in the car on the way home alone, so he wouldn't see. I thought we were close. I genuinely believed that. Then he met the Hargroves. Sandra Hargrove, my son's wife, came from what people in certain zip codes call old money. Her father, Warren, made his fortune in commercial real estate. Her mother, Patricia, had that particular kind of elegance that functions as a weapon. They were not bad people exactly. They were the kind of people who had simply never been told no, in a way that stuck. Daniel started changing about 8 months after he and Sandra got serious. Small things at first. He stopped calling on Sundays. He started correcting the way I spoke at dinners. Once at a restaurant, he leaned over and told me I was holding my fork wrong. I'm 66 years old. I have held a scalpel with enough precision to repair a valve the size of a quarter. I told him so. Quietly. He laughed it off. But his eyes went to Sandra first, to check her expression, before he responded. That was the moment I understood something had shifted. 6 months before the wedding, Daniel came to me with a request. He and Sandra wanted to move into my house. Not permanently, he said. Just while they waited for their new construction home to be finished. 6 months. Maybe 8. He explained it casually, the way he might ask to borrow $20. The Hargroves' guest house was too small for both of them, he said. Hotels felt impersonal. My house had 4 bedrooms, and it was just me rattling around in it. I said yes. I said yes because he was my son, and the house had been quiet since I retired. And I thought it might be good to have life in it again. I gave them the master bedroom, my bedroom, and moved myself into the guest room down the hall because Daniel mentioned Sandra had some back issues and needed the larger mattress. Looking back, I understand exactly what I did. I handed them the house. Within 3 weeks, Sandra had rearranged the kitchen. Within 5, she had hired a cleaning service that came on Tuesdays and left me a passive-aggressive note asking that I keep the common areas tidy between visits. My own living room was now a common area. My books were moved to a shelf in the hallway. The reading chair I had owned for 20 years disappeared into the garage because it didn't match the aesthetic Sandra was going for. Daniel never said a word. I would bring it up gently, the chair, the books, the Tuesday cleaning schedule that somehow required me to be absent from the house for 4 hours, and he would say things like, "Dad, you know how she is," or "It's only a few more months," or "Can you just let this one go?" So I let it go. And then I let the next thing go. And the thing after that? By the time the wedding was 3 months away, I was eating my meals in the guest room to avoid the tension at the dining room table. My own dining room table. The construction on their new home hit a delay. 8 months became 12, then 14. Daniel stopped giving me timelines altogether. One evening I came downstairs at midnight because I couldn't sleep, and I found Sandra on the phone in my kitchen, talking to her mother. I wasn't trying to listen, but the house was quiet. And voices carry. "He's harmless," she was saying. "He just putters around. Honestly, Warren could probably get him to sign over a partial interest if we timed it right. Daniel just needs to ask him the right way." I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I went back upstairs. I did not sleep for the rest of that night. But I did something more useful. I thought, 32 years in medicine teaches you something about problems. The worst outcomes don't come from the disease itself. They come from acting too fast, cutting before you understand the full picture, making an emotional decision in the middle of a crisis. The surgeons who lost the most patients were the ones who panicked. The ones who saved lives were the ones who slowed down, assessed, and moved with absolute precision when the moment was right. I was not going to panic. I called my attorney the next morning, a woman named Claire, who I had used for estate planning for 15 years. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the reasons I've always trusted her. When I finished, she said, "Give me a week." She called back in 4 days. What she found was not illegal, not yet. But it was a pattern. Daniel had already, without telling me, listed my home address as his primary residence on several financial documents. There was a conversation with a real estate attorney, a colleague of Warren Hargrove's, about co-ownership restructuring on a property matching my address. Nothing had been filed. Nothing was finalized. But the architecture was being built. Quietly. Around me. Claire said, "We need to protect the asset." She walked me through every step. I signed what needed to be signed. I filed what needed to be filed. I made a phone call to my bank that took 11 minutes and changed 3 things that mattered enormously. When it was done, Claire told me the house was secured, the estate was clear, and there was nothing they could do without my explicit written consent. I thanked her, hung up, and went downstairs to make myself breakfast in my own kitchen. I said nothing to Daniel. I want you to understand something. I was not planning revenge. I was not plotting anything dramatic. My only intention was to protect what was mine and wait. Wait to see if my son was the person I had raised, or if he had become someone I didn't recognize. The wedding was at the Hargrove estate. Outdoor ceremony, tent reception, 200 guests. A band that I was later told cost $11,000. I was given a seat at a table near the back, not the parents' table. When I mentioned this to Daniel during the rehearsal dinner, he said, "Dad, the seating was Sandra's thing." I didn't really have input. I looked at him for a long moment and nodded. At the rehearsal dinner, Warren Hargrove gave a toast that lasted 9 minutes. He talked about Sandra's childhood, her accomplishments, the values the Hargrove family stood for. He mentioned Daniel briefly at the end and said he was gaining a fine young man. He did not mention me at all. Not once. I was sitting 12 feet away. Daniel glanced at me after the toast. I smiled at him. Not a pained smile. A genuine one, because I had made my peace with what was coming. He looked confused by that, which told me he knew something was wrong with what had just happened. The wedding day was beautiful. I'll give them that. October weather. The kind that exists only in that specific 3-week window, when it's cool but not cold, and the light turns gold in the late afternoon. Sandra looked genuinely stunning. The ceremony was tasteful and short. I sat in my assigned seat and watched my son get married, and I felt something real. He was happy, and some part of me was grateful for that even then. The reception is where things moved. About 40 minutes in, after the first dances and the dinner service, the toasts began. Warren went first again, another 9-minute production. Sandra's maid of honor went second, then the best man. Then Sandra herself stood and spoke beautifully about Daniel, about their future, about what she was gaining. Then Daniel stood up. He spoke well. "My son is a gifted speaker. He always has been." He talked about building a life, about the family he was starting, about the people who had shaped him. I leaned forward slightly. He was getting to it, I could tell. The part where he mentioned me. He talked about Sandra's parents, the family I always wanted to belong to. He talked about how Warren had become a mentor. He talked about Patricia, teaching him things about home and belonging that he had never experienced growing up. He did not say my name. 200 people in a tent, glasses raised, and my son gave a 7-minute toast about the people who had shaped the man he became, and I was not in it. That's when Sandra's mother, Patricia, turned to the woman beside her and made a small comment. I couldn't hear it, but I saw her glance at me and smile the way people smile when they believe they have won something. And that is when I stood up. I didn't rush. I picked up my glass, straightened my jacket, and walked the length of the tent toward the head table. The band had stopped. People were watching. I heard someone near me whisper, "Is he going to speak?" The noise in the room dropped the way it drops in an operating theater when something unexpected appears on the monitor. Daniel saw me coming. His expression did something complicated. Surprise, discomfort, and underneath it, something that looked like shame. Not shame about me, shame about himself. I recognized it because I know my son's face better than he thinks I do. I reached the table and I didn't ask for the microphone. I didn't make a speech. I leaned down to Daniel close, so only he could hear me. And I said 3 words. "I love you." That was it. 3 words. Not a threat, not a confrontation, not a scene. Just the truth, said quietly by a father to his son on his wedding day. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and placed an envelope on the table in front of him. I straightened up, nodded to Sandra genuinely, not sarcastically, and walked back to my seat. The room held its breath for a moment. Then the band started again, and the noise returned, and I sat down and finished my glass of water. Daniel opened the envelope 20 minutes later. I wasn't watching him directly. I had learned, over 32 years in operating rooms, how to observe without appearing to. I saw him unfold the paper. I saw him read it. I saw the color change in his face. It was a letter. 2 pages, written by me over several evenings in the guest room of my own home. It was not angry. It was not accusatory. It was simply an account precise and complete, the way I would write a surgical report of the last 14 months. The chair moved to the garage. The common areas note. The midnight phone call I had overheard. The financial documents Claire had found. The real estate conversation with Warren's associate. At the bottom, I had written 1 paragraph that I want to share with you now, because I think it says what the whole story is really about. I gave you everything I knew how to give. I worked when I should have been present, and I was present when I could have been working. And I have spent 20 years trying to find the right balance of those 2 failures. I do not regret $1 I spent on your education. One Saturday, I rearranged my schedule for your games. One night, I drove 3 hours to sit with you after a bad breakup. I regret only that somewhere in the last year, I let myself become invisible in my own home because I thought that was what love required. It does not. I have corrected the legal and financial matters that needed correcting. The house is mine. The estate is clear. None of that is punishment. It is simply what should have always been true. What happens next between us is entirely up to you. I will be here. Sandra read it over his shoulder. That was when she made the sound that people at nearby tables later described as a scream, though I would call it something closer to a gasp of realization. Warren Hargrove looked across the room at me. I met his eyes and held them for a moment the way I used to hold a family's gaze when I came out of surgery to deliver news. Steady, clear, no apology in it. Then I finished my dessert, said goodnight to the few guests I knew personally, and drove home. My house was quiet. I made tea and sat in the reading chair, which I had moved back from the garage 2 weeks earlier. I read for an hour. I slept better than I had in 14 months. Daniel called 3 days after the honeymoon. His voice was different, quieter, slower, stripped of the particular confidence that had been growing in him since the Hargroves. He said, "Dad, I need to talk to you." I said, "I know. Come over." He sat at my kitchen table, and we talked for 4 hours. He cried twice. I cried once, when he told me he had known what Sandra's father was suggesting with the house and hadn't stopped it, and that he was sorry for that. Not a practiced apology. A real one. The kind that costs something. We are not where we were. That is the honest truth. There is repair work to do, and it takes time. And some walls don't come down easily once they've been built. But we are talking. We are honest with each other in a way we probably weren't even before the Hargroves, because the crisis burned away the comfortable fictions we had both been maintaining. Sandra and I are civil. Genuinely civil. Not performed. She is a proud woman. And proud people can sometimes, not always, but sometimes hear hard truths if they're delivered without cruelty. The letter delivered a hard truth without cruelty. I think she respected that eventually, even if she would never say so. Warren Hargrove has not spoken to me since the wedding. I find I sleep fine with that. Here is what I want to say to anyone watching this. Anyone who has found themselves made small in their own life by people they loved. Anyone who moved into the guest room of their own story. Patience is not the same as surrender. Silence is not the same as weakness. The most powerful thing I did in 14 months was not the letter, not the phone call to Claire, not the walk across that tent. It was the decision to stay calm when every instinct said to react, to take the time to see the situation completely, to act from clarity instead of hurt. I am 66 years old. I have repaired more than 2,000 hearts. The hardest one to keep steady has always been my own. But I have never stopped trying. And I don't intend to start now.